Hello, everyone, and good morning again. Thank you for joining our webinar, Docker and Atlassian, Ship It Better and Faster. We will be recording this session and we'll submit a link to the recording over the next few days. As you have questions, please be sure to provide those via the questions utility in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll get those queued up and Brendan will answer them towards the end of this session. Our next webinar will be on Wednesday, June 29th at 11 a.m. Central, and it's going to kick off our next series, Increasing Your Atlassian ROI. So this series is going to cover best practices and expert tips to enhance enthusiastic usage of the Atlassian suite across your organization. So it's going to start on June 29th, and it's going to be, that topic is increasing adoption. So in this webinar, consultant Sam Bezzosi is going to focus on the key practices, the marketplace add-ons, and the expert services that get your team doing their best work in the Atlassian tools. So whether you're a new Atlassian user trying to amp up the buzz with your team or a longtime Atlassian user looking for a few ways to double down on your ROI, this webinar is going to contain some great expert information for all those audiences. So be sure to register for this on our website or with the link that you'll be provided in the emailed recording of today's webinar. On the webinar today, we have Brendan Kelly. Brendan is a senior consultant and solutions specialist here at Precipio Consulting. So he brings his expertise to both the process and the sales teams, helping to deliver client-tailored Atlassian solutions from both sides of the business. So you're going to get to hear Brendan share how he's set our Precipio Consulting sales team up with Docker a little bit later in this webinar, and also how he helps clients increase deployment of code with a lightweight container technology integrated with Atlassian. It's going to be super interesting. My name is Evan Perkins. I'm a sales consultant here at Precipio Consulting, and as always, I'll be serving as your faithful moderator. A little bit about Precipio Consulting. We've been Atlassian expert partners for over 6 years now, and are one of 5 platinum enterprise experts in the country. Over 99% of our projects are Atlassian related, and we've helped hundreds of clients across the globe, ranging in size from 20-person companies to Fortune 20 enterprises, spanning many different industries. We help our clients with process-centric technology solutions that facilitate traditional business process management, IT service management based on ITIL, and software development lifecycles. In the SDLC space, we're helping clients transition from traditional waterfall to the agile methodology. So whatever widgets you produce, we help improve the quality and throughput at the lowest cost. We support our clients in all facets of the Atlassian product suite and build methodologies and solutions across the entire product line. Solutions architecting and implementations, licensing, upgrades and maintenance, managed hosting, managed services, integrations, add-on development, and training. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Brendan.
Thanks for the introduction, Evan. My name is Brendan Kelly, and I'm a solutions specialist as well as a senior consultant here at Precipio Consulting. And I'm responsible for doing a lot of the discovery on the sales side, as well as product demonstrations and implementing the Atlassian suite. So the main topic for today is Docker. We're going to look specifically at how it helps our teams, especially when it's paired with the Atlassian suite. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and talk about the basics of what Docker is, and then we'll get into how we can use it with the Atlassian tools to really help our development teams work as effectively as possible. From there, we're going to look at some real-world examples, and lastly, we'll wrap up with questions at the end. So feel free to throw some questions in the chat, and we'll be sure to address them at the end. So let's start off at square one. What exactly are containers and this Docker thing that everybody's talking about? Docker and the underlying technology of containers are causing quite a buzz in the IT world nowadays. Unfortunately, a lot of the explanations that are out there get into the nitty-gritty details about the namespace, the kernel, C groups, and all these other complicated things. But what we're going to focus on today instead is the basics of what containers are and how Docker is going to help our teams run more effectively. It all starts with Docker's overall mission. Docker is going to enable us to run distributed applications anywhere. It's going to give us the tools to leverage containers as we build, ship, and manage these applications. Let's break that down a little bit. First, we should discuss distributed applications. By embracing containerization, we can move from big, lumbering, monolithic applications sharing one code base to smaller, more nimble microservices that are running together in harmony. This is a huge change in how we're going to approach the architecture of our applications, so that instead of having larger code bases, we're going to instead break down that functionality into individual containers that we can spin up and tear down as needed. Unfortunately, we don't have the time today to delve into the massive benefits that this architectural shift brings. But I highly encourage you to check out a talk from this year's Atlas Camp titled Sentient Clusters by Nicola Paolucci. He does a brilliant job of explaining exactly what distributed applications will look like in the containerized environment. So today, we're going to focus on the process implications of being able to run these applications anywhere. Containers are going to pack in all of the dependencies and everything that our software is going to need to run. And this is going to have massive impacts as we're building on our developer workstations, shipping and doing our continuous integration and deployment inside of QA and production, and lastly, running our production environment. So what exactly are these containers? Containers are the smallest amount of code necessary to run your software. It's going to include all the libraries, binaries, things of that nature that our software will call upon, and nothing more. Because it's extremely lightweight, we can spin them up and tear them down quite effortlessly, and they're not going to be dependent on the infrastructure that we're running them on. Another way to understand containers is to look at them in the context of virtualization. In the very beginning, we had infrastructure running our operating system and the application on top of that. From there, we introduced the concept of a virtual machine by having a hypervisor run multiple operating systems with each of their applications on top of that. Docker is going to continue this trend and take it one step further by using Docker Engine to then host all the containers. The containers are not going to need additional operating systems themselves, rather just all the binaries and libraries to run that specific application. They're also going to be optimized to run one specific service, which is going to encourage the distributed application architecture that we mentioned before. Docker is going to continue the improvement that we saw with virtualization by continuing to improve the utilization of our infrastructure, as well as just being easier to use. But before we get too far in the weeds with the technical side of things, I found that things of this nature are best described with good old-fashioned metaphors. Let's say that we decide to get into the bartending business. Being the process people that we are, we want to have the highest quality cocktails available as soon as possible. In order to do this, we have a revolutionary idea where we're going to bottle the cocktails ahead of time using the right ratio of high-quality ingredients, instead of our bartenders having to follow a recipe and create them at the bar itself. This is going to ensure that not only the cocktail is the highest of quality, but they're also available immediately. Containers are going to work similar to these pre-made cocktails. Just like with containers, the drinks will come with exactly the right ratio, with no unexpected surprises. So as a developer or as a deployment engineer, when I use the container, I know exactly what's in it, and I don't have to wait for all the resources to be provisioned and everything to be installed. It can quickly spin up, and I know exactly what's going to be in it. Understanding how to make cocktails ahead of time is relatively straightforward, but how does this work with containers? It's all going to start with our Docker file. This is going to serve as the recipe with exactly what's going to be inside of that container, including our version of Python, the various commands we need to run, and the network settings for that container. From this recipe, we are then going to build our Docker image. The Docker image is going to be the template of that container. We can share and pass this image around using our registry, and from there we can also spin up containers from that image. The container itself is where the code in our software is going to live. It's what we're going to actually access and what we can spin up and tear down as needed. So now that we understand the basics of what Docker is, let's talk about the real benefits for your team. I've already sprinkled some of these through the beginning of our talk, but let's take a little bit of a closer look. The first thing we notice with containers is just how light they are. They require less space, less memory, and that really translates to less load time. With speed comes agility. Just by being faster, we're able to react to the market much quicker. So because it takes less time to go from idea through deployment, we can ship those features that we need to test in the market as soon as possible. Reduction of this overall time to market is huge. One prime example of both of these coming together is for BBC News. Imagine the demand for quality and speed for such a widely distributed news outlet. When they adopted Docker, they saw a 60% reduction in their continuous integration build time. That's massive because continuous integration is a huge step as we're looking to ship features. And just like those cocktails, containers are not only faster to create, but they're also consistent and well known. This is really going to reduce the headaches and the back and forth of trying to troubleshoot all the issues with all the dependencies of what's actually in that environment. The same thing that was running on your local machine as you were developing is what's running in QA, and that's what's running in production. All of this is going to come together to help us ship 7 times more often. And that's really the benefit of Docker, is that it smooths out this DevOps process so much that we can deliver more frequently and really move up the process maturity and overall organizational performance. So now let's look at how Docker and Atlassian are going to make our lives easier. As we're working with the Atlassian tools, the largest opportunity to leverage Docker is going to be as our teams are continuously integrating and continuously deploying. As our developers build software, they'll be working off the same Docker file that all the other teammates are using. When it comes time to merge in that feature and test it with everything else, we can have Bamboo automatically trigger that deployment into a container that's using that same image. And then when we go to deploy to either a QA or production environments, again, we can use that same Docker image. So we're getting the consistency of the Docker images with the workflow, automation, and benefits of Bamboo and the other Atlassian tools. All of this is going to be possible through the Docker task. So now let's look at what our process would be without Docker and the Atlassian tools. And this might be something similar to how your teams are running today. Hopefully y'all have had the opportunity to check out Brian Robinson's webinar from the other week covering how development and operation teams can work together in the Atlassian tools. If you haven't had the chance, I highly recommend you check it out. In this week's webinar, the good folks at Rambler, our fictitious travel adventure website, are having issues with the consistency in the environments. On the one side, we have the development team who is building the actual applications, and then we have the operations team who is deploying and then supporting that application. The beginning of this process is going to start when the development team requests the resources that they're going to be building on. Now the operation team is going to spin up those resources and toss back the credentials so the development team can start testing. And then the development team is going to toss over their deployment script so that the operations team can get the resources configured and set up. And then, of course, modifications and tweaks are going to be necessary as the operation teams applies that to the actual infrastructure. And so we begin the back and forth. This is where the process really starts breaking down. The development team is going to realize they need an additional dependency, library, or a different version, and the operations team is going to need to scramble to get that installed and in place. Ideally, this would happen during your 9 to 5, but we've all been there when it's the 11th hour and we're up all night troubleshooting these issues as they appear in our production instance. Having consistent Docker images is going to mitigate all of this headache. So let's see how Docker helped these poor ramblers. With Bitbucket, Bamboo, and Docker in place, our development teams and our operations team are going to have a much easier time getting the product out the door. As they're building it, they can modify the image and ship it to the registry, which is going to serve as the source of truth of what exactly is in the environment. That means that instead of having the back and forth with the development team, the operation team needs to simply get Docker set up on the resources. And once the features are built, as the team is committing and creating their pull requests in Bitbucket, it's automatically going to fire the tests inside of Bamboo, which is going to pull from that single image inside of Docker. If they do come across the additional dependency that they need, they can simply make the change in that Docker image, push it up to the Docker repository, and Bamboo will automatically pull that in as it's doing its tests. And now when it comes time to ship, Bamboo is going to pull that same Docker image that we know and trust, and all they have to do is push the big red button to put that into production, and we're going to have the peace of mind knowing exactly what is in that environment. No more 11th hour firefighting, no weekend-long troubleshooting. It's simple, straightforward, and ready to go. And now for our Seen It, Solved It, let's go ahead and see what this looks like in the real world. Here at Principio Consulting, we use Docker for sales ops to help our sales team deliver best-in-class product demos. We love showing off the Atlassian tools, so it's crucial that we know exactly what we're going to be showing as we are working in these environments. That requires consistent and known instances of Jira that we can quickly spin up and throw away as needed. It's also very vital that they're simple and straightforward, so our sales team doesn't have to try to troubleshoot an environment in the middle of a demo. Now let's go ahead and see what this looks like inside of the tool. I'm going to go ahead and pull up Kitematic, and just a fair warning, this is still in beta, but this is going to provide a graphic user interface for us to work with the containers that are currently running on our local machine. From here, we're going to be able to see exactly what's going on with the container logs, as well as work with starting, stopping, or restarting the actual containers themselves. You'll see along the left side all the containers that are currently available, as well as if we click New, we can go out to Docker Hub to find popular and very useful images to help us get started with our containers. So I'm going to go ahead and start this one. And you'll notice that the logs are going to start kicking up as it's starting Jira up. And if we flip over to the browser, we can actually see Jira load up. And now, as Charlie is juggling the tasks, Jira is going to go ahead and start loading. So as you can see, in just a matter of a minute or so, we're able to, as a salesperson, get into a fresh, clean, consistent, known instance of Jira. And this is going to be the same whether we're on our local machine or if we flip over into Amazon Web Services, as you'll see in the other tab here. So this is going to be very similar to if we're a development team and we're working with our code base, similar to our configuration inside of Jira. So the configuration is like our code, where we can deploy it into a fresh environment and not have to worry about dependencies that we didn't know were there. It's also very easy to spin these up and tear these down, which makes it very straightforward and easy to use. We know that not everybody wants to use Docker for demoing the Atlassian tools. So if you'd like to set up some time to talk through how we can use Docker in the software development process, please feel free to reach out to contact@percipio.com. If you're looking to get started other ways, we can also talk through some training options that we have available, including some basics courses to get your team up and running, as well as some more advanced topics like how to set up the Docker files and get all the images that you need, as well as how to integrate with the Atlassian tools. We also offer support and services to help your teams evaluate Docker through assessments and proof of concepts, as well as full implementations to help you get up and running with not only Docker, but the other applications that help run Docker in production, including Docker Swarm and Docker Compose. A great place to get started in the meantime is docker.com, where you can download Docker Machine and start using images from dockerhub.com as well. They also have a great set of webinars that you can use to learn more about the tools and help get started. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into the question portion of our webinar and go ahead and address all those questions that you guys have thrown in the chat. If we don't have time to get to all of them, we'll be sure to follow up with you over email.
All right, thanks for that information, Brendan. And remember, as you have questions, please be sure to provide those in the questions utility in the GoToWebinar control panel. Brendan is going to queue those up in the order in which we receive them and read those and get those answered.
Alrighty here. Our first question is, do you have to use Bamboo to deploy containers, or will other build systems work as well? So there are going to be a lot of different tools that can deploy into containers. However, Bamboo is going to give you the most traceability, reporting, and workflow automation by integrating specifically with Jira. So we always recommend to use Bamboo because it is going to work best within the Atlassian suite. Our next question here is, how much can you actually fit in a container? And the answer is as much as your heart desires, but it's really going to be constrained based on the infrastructure that Docker is running on. Another recommendation with that is to make sure that we are aligning with the best practice of only having one service inside of each container to make sure that the containers are going to be working optimally. So another question here is, you mentioned a testing tool that integrated between Bamboo and with Docker called Charlotte and Selenium testing. So do you mind going in a little bit more detail about how that will work with Docker and Bamboo? So Selenium testing is going to be an automated testing tool that's going to replace the headache of having to go in and manually click through the browser to test our actual application. So we can use Bamboo and the integration with Charlotte to be able to fire those Selenium tests directly from our workflows inside of Bitbucket. The way that Bamboo is going to come in is that we can actually deploy our code into a container and then have Selenium do that testing on that container and then quickly tear down that container. So again, getting that benefits of the quick spin up and the quick tear down. Another interesting thought there too is that because we can pass in certain variables into our Docker file, into our Docker images themselves, we can do things like iterate through multiple versions of software dependencies or anything else that we want to test in our testing matrix. But great question there. And we do offer services around Selenium testing. So if you have more information, please feel free to reach out. Our next question here is, in Docker, how do you define the term image? And the way I like to think of an image is it's going to be the base template for all the containers that we're going to create. So we're going to build it from our Docker file, which is like that recipe of everything that goes into our container and into our image. And then from there, we can use our image to spin up those individual containers, as well as store that image in a registry and share it with our other teammates. The next question here is, we've recently started using Docker for continuous integration, but need some recommendations on how to start moving towards the distributed application architecture. Again, I highly recommend Nicola Palucci's talk from Atlas Camp titled Sentient Clusters. He does a really great job of explaining exactly how we can use things like Docker Compose and Docker Swarm to move towards that architecture. We also can give some more recommendations offline if you want to. Feel free to follow up with us over email. The next question here is, how many containers can you run at once? Is there any way to track how many resources each container is taking up in the server? So when it comes to running multiple containers, that's going to get into Docker Compose and Docker Swarm. Docker Compose is going to help us quickly spin up multiple containers together and handle a lot of problems around networking and just getting those to set up and work easily together. Docker Swarm is going to be similar to a load balancer, whereas the cluster gets additional demand, it can quickly spin up additional containers to react to that demand. Next question here is more of a comment, actually. We have loved the cocktail metaphor, great illustration of Docker. And I got to give a shout out to Matt Schenk from Atlassian. He did provide that metaphor, and I think it's a great way to describe how Docker works and just the benefits that it does provide. And our last question here is, can you tell us a little bit more about Bitbucket pipelines? So pipelines is a new beta tool, very exciting, coming from Atlassian, and it's going to work with Bitbucket Cloud in order to let us easily and painlessly develop our continuous integration and continuous deployment pipelines directly inside of Bitbucket. So it's actually going to use Docker images to make sure that we are deploying that code into a known environment and then doing a lot of testing from there. Again, very exciting tool. Really looking forward to using this one. It's still in beta. However, I highly encourage you to go ahead and check out Atlassian's website for more information. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to email them in, and we'll be sure to follow up with you. But I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to Evan to go ahead and wrap it up.
And just one more reminder, our next webinar is going to be on Wednesday, June 29th at 11 a.m. Central. And we're going to be kicking off our next series, Increasing Your Atlassian ROI. So the goal of the series broadly is that we want to cover the best practices and expert tips to enhance enthusiastic usage of the Atlassian suite across your organization. And we're going to kick the series off on June 29th with the topic, Increasing Adoption. So in this webinar, consultant Sam Bezzosi is going to focus on the key practices, the marketplace add-ons, and the expert services that will get your team doing their best work with the Atlassian tools. So whether or not you're a new Atlassian user trying to amp up the buzz of these tools with your team, or if you're a longtime Atlassian user looking for new ways to double down on your return on this software, this webinar is going to contain some great expert information for all of you. So as always, you can register for this webinar on our website, or you can use the link that will be provided in today's the emailed recording of today's webinar that you'll receive in the next couple of days. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. That concludes the webinar this morning. If something in this webinar piqued your interest and you want to hear more about how our Percipio Consulting expert team can get you improved processes and awesome software, please feel free to email us at contact@percipio.com, or you can visit our website, percipio.com. There's a contact form there. We'd love to talk to you about how we might be able to help. Thanks again, and we'll see you all in a couple of weeks.